is going on?
Did we lose intro music, Dave?
Brian, you there?
I'm here.
Okay, well, we're experiencing some technical difficulties.
Yay, love live radio.
Love live radio. This is so awesome.
Oh well. Let's move on, shall we?
Let's move on, shall we? This is so great. Welcome, everyone, to Beyond the Strange. I am your host, Dave C., and this is Beyond the Strange. Brian, how's it going?
It's going pretty good. It's been a busy week.
Uh, yeah, you're telling me. I've been working on a project myself. It's been taking me like more than a month, but it's almost done, thank God.
Oh yeah,
But
you're
now
you're busy working on the booth.
busy working on the booth, man, and doing everything else that's a good what is it? What was that movie with Robert Keaton? Uh not mommy daddy, but something like that. I can't remember.
Yeah, I can't remember either. It's right there on the tip of my brain and I can't spit it out for the life of me.
Well, that's me right now. Yeah, except for I got the grandbaby instead of my baby. But yeah, it's definitely fun. But anyways, yeah, it's been an interesting week, and we've been having some really crazy electrical storms here up here in Northern California. It's been really wild. Um, I don't know what's going on with that, but last night it woke me up, and I'm not used to it. So I mean, we're at the beginning of October, and it doesn't usually start cracking like that. And believe me, it was cracking.
Well, last Sunday, didn't know this until at least I think it was last Sunday, if my brain serves me correctly. My mind does. Um, a black bear actually attacked an elderly woman just west of me, I think about 10 miles west of me, at one
Hmm.
of the smaller lakes around here. And that's kind of interesting because if with black bears, they're the smaller variety bear, and they usually don't attack humans. They'll get into your
Hmm.
garbage and they'll be nuisances, but they don't usually attack humans. And yeah, they had that happen, but with the dry season being around here, and most people don't know this about bears, but actually the natural grown berries, out in the forests around here are actually their main diet,
Hmm.
along with fish and whatever else they can scrounge up because they are scavengers of a sort. But with the dry weather around here and all the forest fires, most of their natural habitat and food, as they're trying to stock up for winter to go into hibernation, has kind of disappeared on them. So that's one of the worries around here. Plus, my niece said she saw a big cat roaming around the neighborhood a couple weeks ago.
Oh, they're coming into the neighborhood now, huh?
Oh well, yeah. I mean, I live 10 miles, well, roughly 2 mile. Well, it's more like 10 miles outside of town, so it's pretty rural. It's nothing. There's not a whole lot of people around, and it's a lot of open land. So
Huh.
yeah, it's kind of normal for fall time. I mean, but the bear attack with a black bear, that one's kind of a little out there.
I'll bet. And we usually start hearing that kind of stuff like at the beginning of the summer and stuff like that. But I think with all the drought that's going on and stuff, it's starting to become a lot more common, especially driving out all the animals and stuff like that. But yeah, California is just hurting. But that rain probably didn't do anything because probably wasn't even a drop in the bucket.
Oh no, if all it was overnight, yeah, for the drought, no, that it wouldn't have done anything.
Yeah. But unfortunately, we do seem to be experiencing some technical difficulties. Uh, People are starting to say that they're having issues finding the link with the show. I just put it out there. If anybody can put that link up, there you go, Steph. Thank you very much, producer holographic. Just put it up there. But anyways, moving on. We are live here on Google Hangouts, streaming from YouTube. You can follow us on Twitter at Strange Days 2015. The hashtag is hashtag BeStrange with the letter B and then the word strange after that. We also have a Beyond the Strange Facebook page where we post most of our show's info and updates. There is a Google Plus profile. It is Beyond the Strange. It is our email is beyondthestrange@gmail.com. There's a, there is a Beyond the Strange website. We just started on that, and it is at beyondthestrange.com. Still under construction, so keep checking for updates.
Yeah, that's kind of my fault. I haven't had the time to work on it.
Well, honestly, it's my fault because with this whole schooling thing and doing the daily mommy daddy thing, uh, it's yeah. But anyways, we could talk about that off the air. And finally, you can join the show with your Gmail account or call in on the Skype. The Skype ID is Strange Days 2015. And I'd like to bring up something to start the show off with. This has been on my mind, and you actually brought it to my attention, Brian, with the 74 NASA scientists that died suddenly and mysteriously. Now it's 75. I smell cover up.
Well, I haven't had excuse me. I haven't had a chance to actually peruse the articles. There's two of them out there that cover it that I was able to find, and I haven't had a chance to really cover the articles and find out what's behind the deaths. And mind you, this has been going on for like the last 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I don't know what part of NASA they were actually in, if they were part of the same part of NASA that covers one specific area, or what their actual function inside of NASA was.
Right, and the headline says, another dead NASA scientist. This is all within the last 2 years. Um, oh, you know what? This is an older article. This is actually the 74th. Uh, ooh, that guy actually crashed in his small plane. Wow, that's pretty crazy. These are really mysterious and just they make no sense. 74, 75 NASA scientists in 2 years. That's crazy.
Well, statistically speaking, I mean, there are a lot of people in different functions throughout NASA. I mean, it's a fairly large organization, very tight knit, but fairly large, spanning the globe. But statistically speaking, it's a little strange. And like I said, unfortunately, I haven't had the time to actually dive into what their actual jobs functions with NASA was, to see if there's anything that ties them together.
Yeah, it's a mystery. I don't know what's going on, but that's definitely something that I should be looked into more. And perhaps our guest tonight, Robert Morningstar, when we come back from a break, he can explain some of that that's going on because I know that they are covering. They've got to be covering up something because that just doesn't make sense to me. Um, So yeah, that's pretty crazy.
Well, I mean, I was having a conversation yesterday, and I had this with Holographic, and I had it with Lynn last night after you got off the line.
Hmm.
And, we were talking about everything, and with the standard wage here in the U.S., what the federal standard wage is and all that. There's no place in the United States, not one state in the United States, to where the person that's earning just the standard federal minimum wage could actually pay for an apartment, electricity, and a phone and food, on a monthly basis. Just going by the standard national average, the minimum wage. You can't do it. There's no place in the United States that you can do it. You have to have roommates, or you have to live with family or something in order to survive. And to me, it all kind of ties in. Um, it's to me, it's all of a government stylized cover up. From the minimum wage to keeping, the most basic person down. And we were talking about, the working poor. Even middle class these days is basically the working poor. Um, to these NASA scientists dying. It's more of a grand scheme. It seems like.
Yeah, I'll agree there. It does seem like a grand scheme. Um, we are being tweeted at. Everything seems to be working better. Um, Let me try something really quick here. And yeah, that's still not working for some reason. Something I'm going to have to look into, Brian.
Well, and again, it's these little things. I mean, we've been having software issues, people.
Yes, so please bear with us. I really apologize for this, especially this show tonight. I really just had high hopes that we were going to have a good, great beginning, but apparently we're not. So, everybody, if you please bear with us, we're going to go on a 2 minute break. We'll be right back. And when we come back, we'll have Robert Morningstar. So, please stick around. And welcome back, everybody. This is Beyond the Strange. We are sitting here waiting to talk with Robert Morningstar in just a couple of minutes. I just want to apologize to everybody for the sound faux pas that we're having, but we do have Robert, and that's the good thing. So please bear with us. But our guest tonight is Robert Morningstar. Robert is a civilian intelligence analyst, investigative journalist, and psychotherapist living in New York City. He is a specialist in photo interpretation and computer imaging. Robert is a graduate of Power Memorial Academy and was a New York State Regent Scholar 1967 to 72 at Fordham University, where he received a degree in psychology. He has participated as a research fellow in the U.S. Navy-sponsored program to develop artificial intelligence. An expert in Chinese language, history, and martial arts, he is acknowledged as a master of the Yang family Tai Chi Chuan by the Hong Kong Tai Chi Masters Association and has taught at Oberlin College, Ohio, and Hunter College in New York. In 1992 to 93, Robert worked in the Behavioral Science Department of the International Center for the Disabled. Robert is an FAA licensed private pilot and instrument ground instructor and has studied the paranormal and UFOs for over 50 years and published many research articles on the internet exposing government cover-ups and the deception applied to the JFK assassination. His work is cited in major books on the JFK assassinations, notably in Paris Flaman's The Assassination of America and Assassination Science by Professor James Fetzer. Robert was a featured speaker at the Secret Space Program conference held in San Francisco, June 2015, where he exhibited Apollo lunar anomalies and UFO activity that occurred throughout the Apollo mission. Robert has written extensively to expose NASA's use of disinformation technology. He is currently the publisher and editor of UFOdigest.com, which exposes the real nature and the menace of UFO phenomena and its cover-up. Robert is regularly heard from coast to coast on many national radio shows, including Fade to Black with Jimmy Church. Please welcome Robert Morningstar. Robert, how are you doing tonight? Hello, Robert, are you there? Robert?
Yes, here I am.
Hey, how are you doing tonight, Robert?
I'm okay. What's up?
Oh, everything that you can think of.
Yeah, I know. I call those visits from Mr. Hoover or Mr. Murphy.
That sounds about right.
It's one or the other. Something. So that happens. It's happened to me on stage, but I've been able to pull it off. So, do you want to postpone? Are you having technical difficulties? What's going on?
It seems like everyone's hearing the show. Brian, is that correct or?
Yeah, everybody's hearing us. It's just the audio. It's just the music portion of it that's having the issue.
Oh, so you still want to do the show?
Oh, absolutely. Everyone's on Twitter and they're listening to you, and they heard my
Are they hearing this technical conference?
Oh, yes, they're hearing this right now.
Okay, folks, this is the real world of radio.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, this is my baptism into it. So, Robert, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, please?
Oh, let's see. That's a lot. Where shall I start? How about starting with my UFO work and then working backwards? I'm currently the publisher and editor of UFO Digest, and we work to bring to the public real news about UFOs, the development of new technologies, political activism in regard to disclosure, pushing the government and government agencies to share the information that they have, and if they don't share it and we acquire it, we leak it we give it to the world. Right now, there's an article we've just put up on UFO Digest saying, "Can they hear us? Can they hear us now?" And it's from Paradigm Research. Stephen Bassett is a very highly motivated individual in regard to forcing government into UFO disclosure. And he works, he's a lobbyist for UFO issues in Washington. He actually ran for Congress in Maryland a few years ago. Some of you may know him. He has an organization called Paradigm Research Group. So there's an article about their current state of affairs there. Also, the big news of the last week is the discovery of, or not sort of the discovery, the revelation of water on the planet Mars.
Yes.
A revelation that was made by Richard Hoagland in 1994 and myself in 1996, when I discovered photographs of Mars, which, when I enhanced them, showed the presence of a lake on a mountaintop. And more recently, about 3 years ago, I was watching the NASA channel, and I have a habit of always keeping videotapes or DVDs ready to record. So they were running some really nice pictures of Mars. I threw the tape in and started recording, and lo and behold, the rover panned across some wet sand, and I started to look at it, and it reminded me of Jones Beach. You know, when the tide pulls out. Jones Beach is a famous beach here in New York. And the tide pulls out and leaves pools of water, so I see more and more pools of water. And then at the very end, as it panned to the left, I saw the shore of a Martian beach. And the remarkable thing about this little piece of video was, although they only showed about 3 seconds of the beach itself, I could see the waves rolling onto the beach. But here's the remarkable thing. They weren't rolling at the same speed or frequencies that we see on Earth. They were very, very different kinds of waves. So I was able to copy that videotape and have it. And I did a few frame captures of the beach to show the waves rolling. And I leaked that about, I think it was last year on Coast to Coast with George Noory. And so little by little, people like Hoagland and myself and many others, Joseph Skipper, we find the information in the photographs, we enhance them. Sometimes you just don't have to enhance them, they're just quite obvious. And we've been forcing NASA to pry the door open and let out secrets little by little. And it's a long, enduring process, but this is a big one, folks. Water on Mars, flowing today. Where there's water, there's life. So the disclosure curtain is being lifted ever so slowly. And it is not coincidental that this movie, Mars, the one about the
Martian?
Robinson Crusoe, yeah, the Martian. The Robinson Crusoe story, again transported to Mars. It's not a coincidence that they released this gigantic mega picture from Hollywood at the same time that they admit that there's water on the planet Mars. One of the greatest experiences of my life, as far as astronomy is concerned, was to be able to see Mars at its closest point to Earth in 60,000 years, which occurred in August of 2003. And at that time, I invested in a very high-quality telescope that allowed me to see Mars at 128x, 128 magnification, with a superplazal lens, crystal clear. And I was able to see features on Mars that had not been shown to us, Earthlings. And the next day when NASA published what they purported to be a Hubble space photograph of the planet Mars on the night before, on the night that I was looking at it, I realized what a farce the whole thing was, because what NASA published in August 28th of 2003 was basically a cartoon of Mars. They had stripped all the features that I had seen. They had stripped the atmosphere, the air glow, the dynamic weather patterns, the atmospheric turbulence of oceans or seas of CO2, carbon dioxide, that I saw. There were 2 nights of observation, and on the first night I saw the Hellas Basin, which is a huge impact crater, impact area, so big I could hardly call it a crater. And it's in the southern hemisphere, and when I looked at it through the telescope, I was shocked because it was fuming with gases. And the gases were floating inside this basin, and well, if you imagine a vat of water or a bowl of water with carbon dioxide thrown into it, dry ice. Imagine, how dry ice bubbles up and you see the CO2 gases,
Yes, looks like
coming
fog
to the
coming
surface. Right, like fog, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine 600 miles in this oval ocean or sea, and the fog is rolling inside with waves. And the waves were catching the sunlight, and those waves of carbon dioxide in the fog form were reflecting rainbows. So an ocean of rainbows is what I was seeing inside the fog. And then as the fog lifted and rose and sank at the coast, I could see the striations of the terrain of planet Mars. And it looked to me almost exactly as what we see when we look at the Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon has the striations of all the different colors of red and rust and sand colors. Well, it was like that. That was the Hellas Basin. And the effect of it, of the smoke, let's call it, coming out of this gigantic basin, gave me the impression that I was seeing a freshly impacted asteroid strike on the planet Mars. It was not a dead hole in the ground. So I was shocked by this sight. So I got on the internet, I wrote up a story and description of what I was seeing that night, because really, seriously, this is one of the greatest privileges of my life. Imagine that Mars had not come closer to Earth since the time that man was in the caves 60,000 years ago, drawing pictures in the Pyrenees, in the Lascaux caves. That's how long it had been since Mars had come this close. And there I was with this amazing telescope, and the things I saw on planet Mars, an air glow that looked like it went 30 to 60 miles up. It looked like a giant neon bulb glowing, first of all. The color was completely different than anything that we had been shown up to that time. It was like a big pink-orange light bulb glowing in the sky. Then there were weather patterns, there were clouds, gigantic clouds, thousands of miles long, my estimate, rolling off Tarsus Highland. There's an area of Mars called the Tarsus Bulge, which is an uprising of land and like Palisades, giant cliffs going for hundreds of miles. And because of that terrain, when the winds blew off the steep cliff, the rolling motion of the air would create these gigantic clouds, as I said, thousands of miles long, that were rolling off like logs. So they were rolling parallel to the cliffs from which they were falling, cascading, kind of like clouds rolling off Niagara Falls. Then I saw Aurora Borealis, is what we call it on Earth, when the air or the atmosphere above the North Pole is interacting, the magnetic field interacting with the sun's energy. Well, on Mars, I was seeing Aurora Australoborealis. These were long arcs of electricity, of plasma, that were rolling from the southern hemisphere, arching over into the northern hemisphere and going back and forth like a slinky. And then I had the privilege of seeing Olympus Mons and the 3 volcanoes, which are called the Tarsus Montes. All of these areas are near that area, the Valles Marineris, the giant crack in the planet Mars, that runs from the distance from San Diego to New York. Grand Canyon, that long, 18 miles wide, 4 miles deep, so they say. But that is the rim, that crack in the planet is the borderline, the northern borderline of the largest impact crater that anyone could really imagine. Mars was struck by an impact that destroyed it completely. It just destroyed any ecosystem that it could have had or might have had. And evidence shows that it did have an Earth-like atmosphere, oceans, continents, much like Earth. When it was struck by a tremendous asteroid, which literally rocked and cracked the planet, and this asteroid dug such a deep impact crater into the planet that the sunlight doesn't reach the bottom of the pit until 11, maybe 10:30, 11 o'clock in the morning. So I was seeing Mars in the early morning, and as a result, this pit is so deep and so black that it looked like the pupil of an eye. And as Mars turned slowly to bring this feature into full view, I was shaken to the pit of my stomach. I felt dread. You know, I felt like the astronomer who discovered the planets, not the planets, but the moons of Mars. He said he was frightened when he saw them, and he named them Deimos and Phobos, fear and terror. And so, as I looked at this, I could not believe my eyes. And the planet Mars looked like it was crying a black tear out of the pupil. It was a long streak that went down, kind of like Alice Cooper's eye. You know, that's an archetypal thing. It's an archetypal thing. So I said, oh my God, this looked like an eyeball. So I wrote a thing called the Eye of Mars, thinking that I was making up a new term for something that I'd seen. So it turned out that the Eye of Mars is a term that was used by Percival Lowell, because he had seen this thing through the best telescopes of the time, you know, at the turn of the century, and other astronomers had been seeing it, but they could never make out exactly what it was. They used to think, well, maybe it's an area of vegetation that grows seasonally, but it wasn't, because it happened not seasonally, but according to the angle of the sun, this black spot would appear and disappear. So I had the privilege of seeing it. And in one glance, I saw what had happened to Mars. This planet was struck by 2 or more tremendous asteroid impacts, which rocked it and destroyed its entire ecosystem. And more recently, Dr. John Brandenburg has discovered evidence of a vast nuclear holocaust on Mars, and detonations of nuclear weapons. And he uses those terms. It was not a natural occurrence. Weapons 1,000 times more powerful than Hiroshima. And areas, vast areas of Mars, primarily in the northern hemisphere. So we're only now realizing that Mars played a significant part in the early evolution of life. And as a matter of fact, I was quite amazed last Monday to hear one of the spokespeople, a spokesman from NASA and the Discovery Project, saying that life on Earth, may have come from Mars, which is something that I've been saying for about 20 years. We are the Martians. And he described that life coming to Earth from asteroid impacts that rocketed germ-carrying, germ-laden meteorites to Earth, which spawned here and gave birth to life on Earth, or boosted it. Now, if you see this movie, Mission to Mars, which I like very much, which was made with the full cooperation of NASA, you'll see the story I've just told you. See, that was 2003 when I saw Mars and deduced that this is what had happened. A huge astronomical cataclysm had devastated the planet Mars. And if you see the movie Mission to Mars, at the end, when the astronauts enter the face on Mars, they walk into a room with a holographic representation of the solar system. And as Gary Sinise walks up toward the planet Mars, the asteroid comes right under his arm and strikes the planet, and you see the shock wave wrap around the planet and destroy the ecosystem. And then they depict the the escape of the Martian remnant fleeing Mars, with most of them going to another star system, but one starship coming to Earth and seeding life into Earth's oceans. So I believe that that's actually a more accurate telling of human evolution or evolution of life on Earth than Darwinian theory, and that's what it is. It's a theory.
And it seems like the Earth is, or at least NASA, wants to go back to Mars. I don't know if more so for answers or to actually see if we can live on Mars. Since you said that that there seems to have been water on Mars. We did get a question from Twitter, coming from Gene Vito. He's a friend of the show and also from Fade to Black. And he wants to ask, he says, Dave, ask if Robert thinks the atmospheric pressure at the surface of Mars is greater than what we've been told.
Oh, I do believe that is true. And here, I'll cite one example.
Okay.
I just described to you having seen the Hellas Basin full of fog, full of CO2. Well, I didn't know it was CO2 until about 2 days after I wrote the article, the first article about seeing the basin as if it were an asteroid impact crater still smoking. NASA came out and said that indeed the Hellas Basin isn't a sea of CO2. It's a self-contained ocean of CO2 that's being kept in its place. It's not evaporating and drifting off. NASA said that planetary winds are moving so rapidly over the surface of the Hellas Basin that they create a lid that keeps the CO2 inside the Hellas Basin, basically percolating like a lid on a boiling pot of water if you were about to make coffee. So that's one example. Now, NASA gives us all these stories that the atmosphere is so thin that, the pressure is so light that we couldn't survive. And yet, NASA shows us photographs of Mars at times totally enveloped in dust clouds, sandstorms. It shows us pictures of whirlwinds or dust devils. Now, I ask you, how can you have a planetary-wide dust storm covering up all the features of Mars if you don't have atmospheric pressure and winds that can drive that sand to upwell and rise to create the occultation of the surface? The fact that I have this video of a beach, waters rolling onto a beach on Mars, and the waves propagating against resistance. You see, the wave isn't moving through vacuum, and now you can actually feel some resistance. So the wave propagates at a different rate, and it crests in a different way, and it breaks on the beach in a different way than water breaks on Earth. So the other thing that that NASA claims is that at times the winds on Mars are so powerful that they blow at 200 miles an hour, scouring everything like a sandblaster. Again, how can you have winds of 200 miles an hour when you have very, very little atmospheric pressure? So that's my answer to Gary. Thank you for your question.
Yeah, it would seem if you didn't have that encapsulating atmospheric bubble that as tenuous as what NASA says it is, that sand that is blown up would literally blow right out of the atmosphere out into space.
Yes, but there'd be no pressure of anything to blow it unless it was electromagnetic or something, some levitated force that we don't know about. If we're talking about, you're actually absolutely right. It would be launched into space without air resistance and at a strong enough force. But if you don't have air, if you don't have atmospheric pressure, you can't really have strong winds.
Yeah, this is true. Let me ask you a question, Robert. Let me get your opinion on this. Do you think, and this is just, out there a little bit. Do you think all these missions that NASA has been doing to Mars and all this stuff is more type of an archaeological dig, sort of say, investigation into the planet and its past, that, that with the possibility of them actually knowing that it really did and still does support some type of life?
Yes, I believe that all of these missions that we're seeing are part of NASA's public theater, and that just as there is a public space program involving the space shuttle and the space station, there is a secret space program, both secret space program to the moon and one to Mars. And one of the interesting things about missions to Mars is that when I was a kid or a young man, my college years, we were sending the first missions to Mars, and our spacecraft were taking 2 years to get there. And then they launched the rovers, and the curious thing that I noticed about the rovers is that they were getting to Mars in about 6 months. So there's a tremendous advancement in propulsion and gravitational navigation that that has made it possible to go to Mars in 6 months. I think that's pretty astounding. From 2 years to 6 months, that's quite a fantastic improvement in transit time. So I do believe that we have had other missions to Mars, secret missions, that we really do know that the place is crawling with life, and that they are afraid to reveal this too quickly to the world because it would topple one of the cornerstones of modern science, which is Darwinian evolution. See, if Darwin is if Darwin's theory is proved wrong, then the last 150 years of science topples with it, because so many of its assumptions are based on Darwinian evolution.
Well,
so I think that's a frightening thing about it.
Well, what I kind of preach, I don't really preach it, but my understanding is that science is pretty much what we know is basically a theory. Some of it works and some of it is speculation. So what we actually know as solid hard facts are not necessarily solid hard facts as everybody perceives them.
Right, I agree. The other part is that so much of what science purports today is political. It's politically driven. The political scheme, the political system demands the compliance of science. It's a nice phrase. The compliance of science because of the grant system and the funding system. And any scientist who does not go along is kicked out of the circle of grants and funding. And so it's left to people like Richard Hoagland, myself, and Ken Johnson, and people who fund our own research to really dig and bring out the most important elements of what has been discovered and is suppressed. However, I would like to say that we wouldn't get to where we are if there weren't good guys, as they call them, white hats, on the inside at NASA and the other government agencies, including FBI, CIA, because these people do their jobs and they occasionally leak information or leave it somewhere where someone like me will see it and say, oh, gee, my goodness, what an interesting photo of the moon. Isn't that a bridge on the far side of the moon? Yeah, that's a bridge on the far side of the moon. Well, I'm talking about a Clementine photograph that I found. Well, the public has to understand that there is an ongoing war within the government between what some people call the white hats and the black hats. And the white hats want openness and transparency, and the black hats want secrecy and covert cover and power. And since the whole UFO issue broke, it's actually been a tug of war between the United States Navy and the Army Air Force. And I use that term because even though it's U.S. Army and U.S. Air Force, at the time that these things sprouted and developed, these problems with UFOs, Army and Air Force were one thing, and then they were split into two departments in 1947, but the mentality and the mindset remained the same as Army Air Force, which was keep everything secret, tell the public nothing, deny everything. And the Navy, which has a charter to reveal to the American public discoveries in science and parapsychology, by the way, they are chartered to study paranormal events, paranormal science. So as you look back through the 1950s and 60s, you'll find historically that CIA directors who were Navy men are always trying to tell the American public the truth and take the lid off the UFOs, and then directors who were allied with Army Air Force mentality always sought to keep it secret. And one of the ways, I mean, to keep it secret even from the president, because after 1947, a policy, national security policy, was installed that required that after President Truman, very little should be divulged to other presidents in order to protect them. That's what they're thinking of. If the president doesn't know about UFOs, then he can't be compromised by the UFO issue. So the less we tell him, the better. And yet Eisenhower and Kennedy were adamant that they wanted to know exactly what was going on, because both presidents suffered the same scare, which was UFOs seemed to be trying to trick the United States and the Soviet Union into tripping a nuclear war against each other. By pretending to be incoming ICBMs, behaving like an incoming warhead, they would drive the Russians and us, the American, North American command in Cheyenne Mountain crazy. They'd see a radar feed coming from the North Pole, and you'd see like 10 warheads racing down at thousands of miles an hour toward the United States. And they think the Russians are attacking, and everything would go through the escalation of different DEFCON levels. And then all of a sudden, as they came in over Canada, you'd see the UFOs stop and just take off in other directions. So in 1960s, we weren't sure whether these were UFOs or Russian tricks. And President Kennedy realized that either country could be drawn into a nuclear war, a nuclear holocaust, by mistake. So he made overtures to Premier Khrushchev to start to exchange information and to try to relieve the tension to prevent accidental nuclear war. And this is one of the things that got President Kennedy killed. His desire for disclosure and his order to the CIA and to NASA, the CIA, to reveal. First, to him, he demanded a white paper, a report on the reclassification of all UFOs. And he wanted a breakdown of all the UFOs. Because there was so much secrecy in the government, in his administration, that he realized that the CIA doesn't know what the Air Force is doing, the Air Force doesn't know what the Navy's doing, Navy doesn't know what the Army's doing. They're all doing their things secretly, independently, and nobody knows whose is what. So he wanted all of our projects broken down. He wanted to know what were CIA experiments, what were Navy, what were Army, and so on. And then the leftovers, he wanted to know what was Russian and what was the real unknown. What was unknown was the term for UFOs in that administration. And he demanded that this reclassification be made and given to him by February of 1964.
Sorry, Robert, didn't mean to speak over you.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
I just wanted to ask you, because from my understanding, it seems like, and I've heard it from different sources, that the UFOs or ET was actually trying to prevent nuclear war, that they would be able to disarm with their technology. They would be
Hmm?
able to disarm launches and that sort of thing. But it sounds like, from what you're saying, that they were kind of instigating it.
Well, there's more than one faction, and one faction is pro-human, and the other faction is anti-human. And the only reason sources tell me that the only reason that we are still here and not totally overwhelmed by the anti-human faction of UFOs is that the humane, or the ones that ally themselves with humanity, have been giving us assistance and technology to fend them off. And I recommend Millennial Hospitality by Charles Hall to anyone who wants to know about the so-called good guys, the tall whites, the Nordics as they're called, a very fierce race of extraterrestrials that have been given certain rights in the West, to have a colony and to have their base and to interact with select individuals of the armed services and to exchange knowledge and information for our mutual protection. Excuse me a moment. So I do believe that we are facing a threat to the human race from a certain faction of UFOs. And this faction of UFOs is not human, but it's intelligent. And I consider it, our adversary, to be artificial intelligence. It's something that is, it's animate but not alive. It's like a robot, perhaps, is a good example. A robot programmed to reproduce itself, but one that has no life and has no soul, and it has intellect. And Lucifer is as good a name for it as anything.
Oh yes, absolutely.
So I think that, see, I was talking to my girlfriend the other day, and we're talking about, with Halloween coming, you see all these depictions of demons and devils and Satan and Lucifer. She looked at all these depictions. She said, isn't it obvious when you look at him that he's an extraterrestrial? And I said, you're absolutely right.
Wow, never thought of that.
Look at that picture. Look at all the depictions of them, and then read accounts of interactions since the Middle Ages with demons, vampires, ghosts. They are shapeshifters. They have this amazing technology of being able to intrude directly, act directly on the human's brain, and to impose illusions. Unless you're strong enough, unless your willpower and your self-control is strong enough, they can actually overwhelm your senses and implant ideas in your head that you think are even your own. So a lot of people, they're playing with the occult and seances and Ouija boards. They are actually using these as mediums, and they may not realize that they are making contact with extraterrestrials that may not have their best interests at heart.
So would it be safe to assume that with religions talking about demons and spirits and that sort of thing, how it relates to these ETs, because these ETs seem to be interdimensional?
Yes.
Would that be the case?
Yeah, that's spirit. Isn't that spiritual? If you're able to go from one dimension to another, it's obviously involving an unmaterial nature. You can, if you think of, when we talk in Tai Chi, for example, you and I were speaking about it earlier.
Oh yes.
We talk in terms of Chi, right? Chi and the life force, and Chi can be anything from radiation to the utmost density of matter. And if you think of the 3 stages of water, the water can have a completely rock-solid nature and structure as ice, and then dissolve and melt into water, and then be boiled and turn into steam, and then steam will just disappear into the room. all of the constituent atoms and molecules are still in the room, and you just can't see them. So using that analogy, I use that analogy of for example, the precipitation of ghosts. That's what I call it. Precipitation is like rain, right? Rain is always in the air. It's not always falling. Rain is in the air, but the molecules are separated from each other by the air pressure. The air pressure drops, the water molecules come together and coalesce, and then if it drops far enough, they touch and create drops, and then the weight of the drop brings it down as rain. But the rain is always in the air. So spirits may always be in the air, but they may not be able to precipitate or want to until the time comes when something very important comes up, either for them or for you, and a ghost will appear. And this is, I do believe, having had many ghost experiences in my life, I do believe in the idea of ectoplasm, which was kind of an amorphous, funny word from the days of the occult seances and ghost hunters, ectoplasm. But you know what? A few years ago, I had a realization. As I said, I've had many ghost experiences. And one of those ghost experiences was so frightening and rattling to my system that it changed my life. And this ghost came, it was a white apparition, it came right to my bedside, it communicated with me. I won't go into many details, except to say that I felt like every molecule in my body, every material atom in my body, felt like it was going to die of fright. And yet my mind was clear, and I was centered enough to communicate with this being, while my body quivered like jelly. And I had such a separation of mind, body, soul, and spirit that mind, soul, and spirit pitied my body. It looked upon the body as this craven, frightened little animal, and we were detached from it while I was going through it. But the point I'm going to make is that when this thing was coming toward me in a human form, I said to myself, this is antimatter. And this antimatter idea is very important because it brings in the realm of physics, okay, as an explanation for these metaphysical things. But in the aftermath, I reflected on what was going on in my body and why my mind was not afraid, but my body was quivering as if it was going to die. And I realized that my body was cold. My body seemed like it was losing all the life force out of it because of the super cold. And I realized, my God, perhaps there's a super cold technology which is used to make spirits or ghosts precipitate, become visible. So that was my first insight. However, a few years later, I was watching a program about this very unusual substance called the Einstein-Bose condensate. And it turns out that they can take helium and freeze it to super cold and then contain it in a magnetic field and create a field of this fog, similar to what I was describing, the CO2 in the Hellas Basin. Yeah. And they can actually make it appear and stay there by moving it magnetically, but it's always trying to dissipate. As soon as the magnetic field or the temperature change, it will dissipate and disappear. And so the scientists said that they keep it in visibility and in control by moving it so that it can't, like water trying to go down a drain. If you move the drain, it can't go down, and so the water would keep swirling looking for the drain. Well, that's an example of this Bose-Einstein condensate. And when I saw it, I said to myself, hey, that's probably what ghosts are made of when you see them.
The ectoplasm.
That's yes, awesome. Ectoplasm, and the ectoplasm is the Bose-Einstein condensate. Look it up, folks. It's very interesting stuff. Very spooky stuff.
Yes, it does. I'm sorry, Brian. Did you have a question?
Well, I was going to say it goes to make sense. Because if you look at superconductors, all the experiments done with superconductors, most of
Yeah.
those have to be at super cold temperatures in order for them to work. As soon as they start heating up, you lose the superconductivity of the superconductor. And most of our experiments that we've ran on other things that have been scientific have been ran under super cold temperatures just to get the effect that we wanted.
Mm-hmm. Well, the
So
same
yeah,
applies to all electronic gear. One of the pitfalls, is the heat. The way we use electricity always generates heat in the circuit. If you can keep that heat down, right? If you can keep cold, the electrons move more rapidly, and there's less deterioration of the substance of the material that makes up the circuit. The U.S. Navy discovered many years ago they were having computer failures. And they thought, why do we have computer failures? We have the best circuit boards that money can buy, and still they fail. Why are they failing? So they took the failed circuit boards and put them under an electron microscope, and what they found was that an electron wind is created by the movement of the current through the circuit, and this electron wind drives molecules of aluminum. It pushes them. And then these molecules of aluminum would begin to aggregate at the junctures, at the corners. Where you see in a microcircuit, and you see all the junctures, the turns, and the overlaps. And this electronic wind was creating this aluminum residue, which was building up over a period of time, and then would actually make the circuit fail.
acting like a dam, sort of.
Sort of, yep, plugging up the circuit or interfering with the conductivity, because aluminum doesn't really conduct electricity, neither is it magnetic. It's kind of an odd metal.
Wow,
So I
we
think
are.
the ETs have a very deep knowledge of all of this, and far better, greater knowledge and technology than we have. But I also talk a little bit against the space brother concept, the idea that these ETs are all benevolent, good guys, and they just want to come here and save the Earth. If they want to save the Earth, it's for their own purposes. They don't want to save the Earth for us. They have an interest on this planet. There are resources on this planet. They may be mineral, they may be material resources, or they may actually be human resources. Many contactees feel that one group, as I said, there are several groups of aliens operating on the planet, but one group of aliens is particularly interested in this thing called the human soul, because they don't have it, and they want it. Because the human soul is that quality of humanity that makes it possible for us to transcend and interact from the densest levels, the deepest levels of matter, to communication with the Godhead, spiritual experiences, telepathy, purely mental experience. So we have the privilege of being able to interact with every level of reality, but things that don't have souls are cut off from that higher communication with Spirit, God, Jesus, Buddha. If you're a materialist, right there, all of that existence is cut off, because materialism ends where the atoms and the molecules end, and the metaphysical world is everything inside, in between those atoms and molecules.
That's all fascinating. We are speaking with Robert Morningstar here on Beyond the Strange. I'm Dave C. We're with Brian Anderson also. You can follow us on Twitter at the hashtag BeStrange, and um, give us some questions for Robert. He seems more than happy to answer any of these questions, and I'm just learning so much, Robert. This is all amazing. Do you mind if
I
we
like
take a quick? Go ahead,
Oh,
please.
go right ahead. Take a break. But I'd
I
like
was just
just to
gonna.
say, knowledge shared is knowledge doubled.
Oh, it's awesome. And when we come back, I would like to hear some more about Tai Chi. And yeah, that'd be great. So this is Beyond the Strange, and we'll be right back. Don't go away. And we are back with Robert Morningstar. This is Beyond the Strange. I am Dave C., and with us is Brian Anderson. And we are going to be talking a little bit about Tai Chi. Can you give us a background on that, Robert, please?
Okay. Well, Tai Chi, the correct pronunciation is Tai Chi, and like capital G. Just if you want to have a good Chinese accent, it's called Tai Chi.
Okay.
And Tai Chi is a concept, a Taoist concept for the supreme ultimate. Now, the practice of the art, a martial art, is called Tai Chi Chuan. And Tai Chi Chuan means Tai Chi fist, Tai Chi boxing, or power. Chuan can also mean power. So the supreme ultimate power. And it teaches that there is something called the way. We follow the Tao. We follow the way. And the Tao is neither hot nor cold, dark nor light. It is what lets the light and now the dark appear. That's the dividing line between light and darkness. It's neither one. And this encompassing system is universal, involving the principles of yin and yang, positive and negative, hot and cold, all polarities, all dichotomies, all opposites are contained. Now, the word Tai Chi is very interesting to me personally as a concept of divinity, because almost all other religions give God a name, and the Taoists were smart enough to know that you can't give God a name. Only God knows God's name. And they said, you know, God is too much, you know, too much for us to comprehend in these mundane concepts. So let's call it too much, supreme ultimate, Tai Chi. Tai means extreme limit, the extreme of anything. And G is a limit. So the extreme limits of everything in the universe, that is the Tai Chi, that is what I prefer to use the word Godhead. The idea being that creation is unfolding from a single point in the universe, which is the mind of God, the center of the universe. My teacher, Professor Cheng, called it Shizhong, the center of time. So the idea is that creation is unfolding from the center of time, and this creative idea propagates through time and interacts with all of creation. And in the process of this interaction, existence and life unfolds. So to be in tune with Tai Chi is to be in balance with nature, with earth and heaven, with gravity. Gravity is really the most important element in our lives as human beings, because it is the force that is with us from beginning to end. Unless we go into outer space and can experience weightlessness for a brief period of time, we are always under the influence of gravity. And gravity, it will either make you or break you. The secret of Tai Chi is a special concept of skeletal alignment and posture, which allows you to conduct gravity in the most efficient way possible and to harness it. Would you excuse me? I have a cat here who's distracted.
No problem.
He's asking out. So let me let him out for a moment, please.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I have those too.
Oh, cats?
Oh yes. Well, I have one, and she can be a pain too.
Well, that was Galahad. I had Lancelot and Galahad, and Lancelot is an incessant conversationalist, so I just throw him out of the room whenever I do radio. But his brother, if he's stuck in here, starts to miss him about after an hour, and he just begged out. So thank you for your indulgence. And,
oh, absolutely. Those are cool names.
Little intermission to do to Galahad.
No, absolutely. No, that's
anyway,
cool.
I was talking about Tai Chi. And Tai Chi and cats really are, it kind of goes together, because when I teach people Tai Chi, I tell them, I'm not only going to teach you how to move like a cat, I'm going to teach you how to think like a cat. Well, how does a cat think? Well, I'll tell you one thing. A cat thinks, but he doesn't use any words. See, and a cat, is a survivor, just like the human being. Cat's been on this planet as long as we have, evolving. And a cat makes instantaneous judgments and decisions, and they're totally nonverbal. And I believe that human beings used to be that way before the verbal brain became dominant and took over. And as the verbal brain became dominant in our existence, we started to lose consciousness and contact with other faculties, higher faculties, instinct, intuition, things that helped man survive out of the caves and into society. And Tai Chi involves getting back to the fundamental plan, or the fundamental blueprint for the human being. Tai Chi is not really a series of movements alone. What we call the form, with a capital T and a capital F, it's not the movements. The movements are guides, guideposts to acquiring and reclaiming the form. And the form I'm talking about is Adam's form. The form of Adam, as he was created in his perfection. And that perfection involved structure. Adam had a perfect form and a perfect structure. But when Adam lied, or whatever the sin, quote-unquote, sin of the fall was, breach of trust with God, or not keeping his word, deceit, deception, lying, Adam lost his form. His form was connected to his conscience. And when the conscience, when he realized conscience, the shame deformed him. Now these ideas are not necessarily directly from Tai Chi. This is more of from mystical traditions like the Zohar. In Jewish mysticism, there are readings, and one is called the form of man, and it tells of how when man was formed, when Adam stood up in the garden, he was upright, he was perfect, and all the animals feared him because they saw that form. But that after Adam fell, he lost that supernal form. That's the word they use there, supernal form, which means a form almost like God's. And then when the animals saw that he had lost his supernal form, animals no longer feared Adam, and then man had to fear animals. So the Tai Chi is a process for reclaiming your Adamic form. And this Adamic form is very clearly defined in the principles of Yang family Tai Chi Chuan. And this is a skeletal alignment idea. The idea of the perfect form is associated with a perfect posture. And this posture involves learning a system for perfectly aligning all of your bones skeletally in such a way that the bones alone, when they're held in these configurations, will hold the body up with the greatest efficiency, and the rest of the body can remain relaxed, at ease, and do work without expending as much energy or force as it usually does. Any part of your body where you're out of alignment becomes a liability, because where you lose alignment, you have to compensate for the support of that alignment with physical, muscular stresses in some cases. Others are internal stresses that are imposed. One little example: if a person walks with the head forward of the body, right? If you lose your alignment in your neck, your head generally will pop forward. When your head pops forward, it has a tendency to pull you forward, so the body tilts back at the shoulders, and you start to develop a sway back. So one of the things that we work in Tai Chi, Yang family Tai Chi, is to get a very straight, upright spine with no curves in it. Instead of having 3 curves in the spine, we want to have one uniform curve, kind of like an English longbow. The other simple points. Look at the foot. If you look at the foot, it's narrow at the heel and broad at the ball of the foot and the toes. And yet people stand as if it were the other way around. Most people stand with most of the weight in the heel and less weight in the ball of the foot. Well, that's contrary to its design. Its form, its structure reveals its purpose. And since 70% of the weight of the area of the foot is forward of the ankle, the Tai Chi masters deduce that 70% of the weight of the body should always be resting in the ball and the toes. Okay? So when you learn to do that, it changes every step you take, because most people are falling through life. They're really not in balance. They take one half step, do a half shift, and then they fall into the next foot. And those feet are not always pointing in the same direction, which is a good thing to do if you're going anywhere. Make sure your feet, the toes, are pointing in the same direction where you intend to go. Because if your feet point in different directions, the structure of the human body is such that if the foot points off to the right, the knee has to follow it to the right. But if your path is straight ahead, you're deflecting. You're moving off and then coming back on. And I call it zigzagging through life. So working on correct alignment is the principal purpose of practicing the Tai Chi form. Then there's the principles of yielding and not resisting. I'm saying, the Taoists say, consider the tongue and the teeth. The teeth are hard, the tongue is soft. It is the tongue that outlasts the teeth. Right? That's the thing about rigidity and hardness. If you're rigid and hard, you can break. If you're liquid and fluid, you can splash, but you don't break.
Mm-hmm.
So Tai Chi teaches a very high level of sensitivity, such a high level of sensitivity that my teacher taught me that any object that is going to strike your body, whether it be a ball, a rock, a fist, a car, anything that's going to strike your body is pushing air before it. And if you can develop the sensitivity to the change in the pressure of the air that the object is driving before it and get out of the way of the air wave, the shock wave, then that object will never hit you or strike you. And if it does, and you start to move with it, the impact will be lessened, less than it would be if you're rigid. So we practice certain meditations. Some of them are the form individually, but there's a two-person form called push hands, or sensing hands is a better way of expressing it. And the purpose is to learn to root yourself and hold your ground while remaining completely flexible, resilient, and to be able to receive force directed at your body, evade it, and take the same force and return it through certain movements, I suppose. It's not technique, it's sensitivity. A good example of Tai Chi and how it works is easily conveyed if you remember these movies about knights that were made in the 1940s and 50s, and you saw scenes that involved jousting.
Yeah.
So when they were rehearsing or practicing jousting, they had an actual wooden dummy, and the wooden dummy would be a facsimile of a knight with a shield in the chest and a real straight arm out, like a wooden arm, and on the end of that arm was a ball and chain, and it was a spiked ball. So the knight would have to race with his horse, aim his lance at the spear, aim his spear and his lance at the shield. And if he hit the shield, the thing would swing around really rapidly, whipping this Morningstar around to crown you. So the knight not only had to hit and lean forward into the lance, when he hit the shield, he had to duck because the force that he and his lance were imparting to the shield were spinning the wooden dummy around, and that was going to come around with this whipping ball and chain, and he could actually be killed if he didn't duck in the right manner.
Yeah.
So that's a gross description of how the forces work in Tai Chi. So if the opponent is going to strike you to the left side of the chest, you yield the left side of the chest and turn to the left, but return the energy you're receiving in the chest through your arm to the opponent, and guide him to where he wants to go, which is usually down. Because here's
Yeah.
another thing.
You
Here's
can go
another
anywhere.
thing. Here's another thing you learn about aggression. When an attacker attacks the person, uh, the attacker expects resistance and calculates that resistance as part of his balance. So when let's say an attacker attacks a Tai Chi master, he'll punch and punch really hard, expecting to hit something, and that expectation of hitting something is a kind of reliance on its resistance for his balance. He doesn't realize this until the aggressor punches and hits nothing. And when he hits nothing, that anticipated resistance, which was part of his equation of his own balance, is gone. And he loses his balance momentarily and then has to regain it. Well, Tai Chi masters can seize that moment. They can seize that moment when the imbalance occurs and when the aggressor attempts to regain his balance. The Tai Chi master will move in and add a little more to it and undo him with his own force, his own reaction.
That's
Let me give
awesome.
you one little example. I really don't like to talk about the violent aspects of
Right.
martial arts, but it is a reality that not everyone is, peace, love, and happiness, and you have your best interests at heart. And there are times, when you do try to walk away, but you can't because it will follow you. And it's for those instances when you really have to be ready.
It's unfortunate.
Yeah. So Tai Chi has saved my life many times, from brawls in the street, saving people in New York City from muggers, stabbers. I once got clocked with a baseball bat in a brawl in the street. I saved my neighbor from being attacked by two thugs. One guy grabbed the baseball bat, started swinging it, and he came. And we were stuck between two cars, two parked cars, and he came over the top and whacked me right on the head with this baseball bat. The
Holy
bat
crap.
clocked off, and again, because of my resilience, flexibility, and yielding, when my body felt the impact, it yielded, and the bat bounced off my head into my hand. And when my hand gripped it, this inner voice said to me, "Robert, if you let go of that bat, this guy's going to kill you." So my grip turned to steel, honestly. There was something that moved through me that said, this bat will never leave my hand again. And the man went to swing it again. And as he went to swing it again with two hands over the top, at the right moment, I bent my legs and my ankles, and I lifted him and the bat, using the bat. I lifted him off the ground at the moment of his most powerful moment of his swing. And every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And when I did that, instead of the bat coming down on my head, he left the ground and did a backflip. And in doing the backflip, as I said, we were between two cars. His backflip knocked him into a truck. He bounced off the truck and bounced into the car. And the third one was he landed in the street with me standing up, holding the bat, covered in blood. And he looked up at me, and he screamed in terror, thinking that I was going to turn the bat on him, but I wasn't. So it happens too rapidly when you train in Tai Chi for years and years and years, and it becomes part of your being. It happens too rapidly for you to even think about it. And you have these wonderful and miraculous escapes, and you feel, honestly, you feel like your guardian angel is with you all the time, and that if you fall, the guardian angel pulls out a cushion and throws it on a concrete street, and you roll off that street as if you were a sponge. But that's only if you're good. If you're not good,
I'm sure you have to be really
it takes
good.
practice. It takes practice. But honestly, I realized early in my career that Tai Chi is one of the things I was born to do, and one of the reasons that I was convinced that I was born to do this is that when my Tai Chi master died, he came to visit me. that was a turning point in my life. I spoke earlier about ghosts, and I talked about one that totally mortified me. This one scared me, but he gave me reassurances as he approached me. I started to get scared. I was paralyzed, and I was awake, and I could see this person walking toward me in my apartment where I was alone. Had no explanation of how this person could possibly get in, but they were walking right toward me, and I clenched my fist as the fight or flight reaction is innately human. And when I took that idea that I have to defend myself, he said to me, "Don't be afraid, Robert. Nothing can harm you." And when I heard those words with that affirmation, I said, "Okay, I'm going to trust. I'm going to weather this out, see what it is about." So the person walked over to me and touched me on the third eye, my forehead. And I felt a love that was incomprehensible. I felt unworthy of it. And I said to myself, who could love me so much? And I had one eye open and one eye closed. My right eye was closed, my left eye was open. I could see clearly this person standing right there, touching me and effusing this unbelievable love, compassion, and knowledge was coming into me. And I wanted to see, the fear left me. And with all my might, I took my right hand and tried to pry open my right eye so that I could see the face. But when I did that, the person stepped away and then walked away. And as he walked away, I looked and I saw the back of a white-haired head, a long gown or professor's robe. And then I looked at the feet, and they appeared not to be touching the ground. And that really struck me. The feet looked like they were walking on air. The heels were not touching the ground. Then I looked up and saw the whole body, and it disappeared from upper right shoulder and head to lower left. And I said to myself, oh my God, that's why they call them shades, because he just rolled up like a shade. And the other part, the second thing I said to myself after saying that, my God, that's why they call them shades. Then I said, it's just like the teleportation machine on Star Trek. Because literally, that's the way it looked. Dissolved. It dematerialized, just like beam me up, Scotty. It was exactly like that. And at that moment, I didn't know who this person was. But I was overwhelmed with this experience. I thought I had an experience with, Christ himself. And an hour later, I got word that Professor Cheng Man-ching, Grand Master of the Yang family, Tai Chi Chuan, had passed away in China, in Taiwan, 3 days before. Now, when I got word about his death, that was an incredible experience, because that's when I realized who it was. The back of a white head, the professor's gown, the feet not touching the ground. Well, that was the last Tai Chi lesson that I received from late Grandmaster Cheng Man-ching. And I have learned to walk that way as often and as regularly as possible. So when I walk, it looks to people who are walking behind me that my feet don't look like they're touching the ground, because I don't walk on the heel. I walk what they call Indian walking, or the Chinese. Chinese have a very nice term for this technique. It's called a cotton step. C-O-T-T-O-N, cotton. Cotton step. So we try to walk and place the foot as if it has the weight of cotton. And then we shift the weight. We also think about walking as if our feet are empty glasses. And so you put an empty glass on the table, and then you put the water in. The water is the weight. So it involves really contemplating every aspect of your mechanical activity and always adhering to the principles of Tai Chi Chuan, which are actually quite simple. The hip, the shoulders, and the ears should always be parallel. You draw 3 lines, one line across your hips, one line across your shoulders, one line through your eyes and ears. And those 3 lines should always be parallel. So the head should not be tilted, the shoulders shouldn't be tilted. And unfortunately, many people have one leg longer than another. And this creates a problem. If you have one leg longer than another and stand in two straight legs, your hips are going to be tilted, and your spine would grow out of that tilt like an upside down capital T. But the brain knows what vertical is, and it will compensate and try to straighten you up. So this puts a bend in your body, which turns into scoliosis. And I've helped a lot of people with scoliosis correct the spinal deviation by adjusting the gait, adjusting the step, or even the way of standing. How do you adjust it? Well, it's very simple. You stand on the short leg straight, and you bend the long leg enough to get the hips level. And actually, I'm very proud to say that I've helped a lot of people who had, let's call it a crippled gait. They walked and looked crippled. There's this hitch, and one person was a gymnast who had one leg was 3 inches longer than the other. And I saw him on rings, and I saw him on the apparatus. He was fantastic. And then he got off, and he was walking away as if he was crippled. And I looked at his situation, and I walked over to him, and I said, "Listen, can I talk to you? Don't be offended, but I think I can help you." So I gave him a lesson for half an hour on how to walk with the long leg bent at the knee and the short leg not quite fully straight, but a little bent, so it evened it out. Well, you wouldn't believe it. 6 months later, I ran into him again, and the way he walked, you could not tell that he had had that walk before. And these are mechanical adjustments that you can do. Another friend, my students do become my friends, yes. But she had severe scoliosis, and she had one leg longer than the other. And then I found out something in the 1970s, because I've always been studying physiology along with psychology. And it was discovered in the 1970s that pitchers had more massive bone density on the pitching arm than on the catching arm. And up to that time, doctors and scientists had thought that once your bones had grown into adulthood, that they were set for life and they were going to stay that way. And they didn't realize that bone is malleable and bone changes shape, density, almost on a daily basis according to the information that you're giving it with the stresses that you're imposing on it. So to make a long story short, when the scientists discovered this strange thing about the pitching arm of pitchers was more massive bone density-wise than the catching arm, they started to do studies as to why. Were they finding these strange people who had massive pitching arms and less massive catching arms? And they found out no. The action of pitching creates an electrical force in the bone structure. Actually, any motion that you make creates a piezoelectric current in your bones because bones are crystalline. And this electrical current tells the bones cells where to build up and where to break down. There are two words, osteoblasts and osteoclasts, to describe this process of building up bone and dissolving bone. So here's the key to the Tai Chi story that I said was all about skeletal alignment. If you're walking around in a misaligned structure, bad posture, just call it that, bad posture, you are stressing your skeleton in such ways that the skeleton will react to build up bone in a compensatory manner. It'll build up bone where you don't really need it in reality if you walked correctly or stood correctly, and it will stress your body. It'll create inflammation, rheumatoid arthritis. I have helped many senior citizens with Tai Chi reduce the swelling of knees and wrists and elbows, shoulders, just by correcting the mechanical aspects of how they move. So that, in a nutshell, is really Tai Chi.
And this is a system that you call the Yang system, Tai Chi?
It's Professor Cheng's Yang Family Tai Chi Chuan, the short form. Professor Cheng was a genius who was so well educated that he was able to make even greater advances. In his 74 years, he was able to make, probably 100 years of advancement in Tai Chi theory, and the explanation of its principles. And so he taught it in this very special way, which is basically sacred geometry applied to your body, your skeleton, as if it were architecture. So simple things. Shoulder width. The distance between the middle bones in your feet should be no wider than the widest joints in your body, that being the hips or the shoulders. We just call it shoulder width. Because think of it in terms of buildings. We build buildings wide at the bottom and tapering off at the top. Sometimes we build, columns like the World Trade Center were. Right? Other times it's like they angle in. But we never see a building that's really broad at the top and narrow at the bottom, because it's unstable. It just won't stand for long. Even if you can contrive an architectural scheme to do it, that thing will fall. So the shoulder width idea is paramount to being in balance. Now, why shoulder width? If you're wider than shoulder width, overstable and less mobile. If you're narrower than shoulder width, you are extremely mobile but less stable. So the ideal, the best of both worlds, is to have, it's very much, I talk in terms of locomotives and railroad tracks and gauges. The width of the wheels of the train or the locomotive has to be exact as the rails. Because if the rails are wider or narrower, the train gets derailed. Well, that analogy holds very, very lucidly and accurately to everyday life. Well, many people are walking a tightrope through life. Their stance is too narrow. And as a result of walking on this very narrow stance, like walking on a tightrope or a narrow plank, there's never going to be a sense of real security in your balance. And then there are people who are overstable and walk too wide. Those people are never going to feel mobile or agile or quick or fleet. There are these wonderful words in our vocabulary that we've lost contact with, like celerity, rapidity, agility,
Nobody
grace.
talks about that no more.
How about grace?
Grace is a good one. Compassion.
Yeah, well, you know what? It's very insightful, because we went from architecture to feelings, and it's true. If your body is under stress from your architecture, you're not going to be able to feel your natural feelings. And I would say, from my 42 years of teaching Tai Chi, practice and teaching Tai Chi, that about 80% of the stresses that people are suffering are structural. Freud was a great con man, one of the greatest con men of the 20th century, and one of the real villains of the 20th century.
I've never heard of that before.
That's what it's done to America. It's all Freudian. They sold us a bill of goods. Like, there's only one school of psychology on this planet, and it's Freudianism. And nothing could be farther from the truth. But Freud is famous for de-stressing people, for having them talk for an hour lying down on the couch. Well, folks, it wasn't the talking that de-stressed them. It was the lying down on the couch for an hour that made them feel better. So I've developed my own. Yeah. But Tai Chi is the greatest thing that ever happened to me, and I encourage people to explore it. Even if you study it for a little while, if you take what you learn and apply it, it will grow, and you will benefit from it. A case in point, I had one gentleman who studied with me 25 years ago, and he studied with me only for the briefest amount of time, maybe perhaps 2 months. But he was a very sincere student. His name was Martin. And he, pardon the expression, but he came in like a wimp, His posture, people have wimpy postures. They look scared, afraid, scrawny, unmanly, pardon the expression, which is, in some circles, that's politically incorrect to talk about manliness. Well, anyway, he came and he studied with me, and then he had to go away. He went away. He got jobs. He traveled. And 5 years later, he came back, and I was flabbergasted. I was amazed at what he had done. And he told me, I took everything that you taught me, and I traveled around, and I did a lot of menial jobs. I worked as a janitor in Ireland and scrubbed floors. But every time when I was scrubbing that floor and mopping and sweeping, I was thinking of Tai Chi, and I was applying it. And I said, my God, let me shake your hand, man. You have done a fantastic thing. You know, he reconstructed himself. That's basically what Tai Chi is. It's a reconstruction process to realign, reconstruct your skeleton according to the blueprint that the designer had in mind. That's why I like to call it Adam's walk. You know, Adam felt pretty good that morning when he woke up in the garden.
Oh yeah.
Took those first steps, you know, Adam's walk. So if you want to regain that, Tai Chi is one method. There are other schools of movement that have converged and discovered same or similar principles. But Tai Chi Chuan is, you know, over 1,300 years old. The written history. And someday I'll come on your show and tell you the secret history of where Tai Chi came from.
Oh, I'd love to. I was just talking to Brian through text that it's just been amazing. I mean, the time is gone so fast. We've only got like 10 minutes left, and we would love to have you come back on.
Thank you.
Backpedaling a little bit in the Twitterverse, there was a question going back to Mars, if you don't mind answering.
No, I don't know.
Before we go, K28 wants to know, Robert, what do you think it sounds like on Mars? Why doesn't NASA ever place microphones on their rovers? And that's actually a good question.
Personally, I think they do have microphones on their rovers, and I think that they just don't give us the audio.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I think. I can't imagine sending rovers to a planet that has an atmosphere and not having mics. That's a fantastic question, K9. Really good one. And I really think that you've discovered. I don't believe that the rovers go up there without an audio feed. It's just that we don't get it. That's my belief.
Gene Vito.
Good, Brian.
Gene Vito asked, he's wondering, Robert, if you think there are other planets or moons within our solar system harboring life and intelligence.
Oh, yes, I do. I believe that there is intelligent activity happening on the far side of the moon, and it's several of the moons of Jupiter and Saturn. Saturn is a very interesting place, not just for its rings. Let me just tell you this little short story about the tracking of the UFO fleets that appeared in equatorial orbits in 1947, 48, 49, and 50. Motherships came in, and they were coming and going. So the Central Intelligence Agency and the U.S. Air Force and Blue Book, they enlisted a bunch of astronomers with the best telescopes to try to track these UFO fleets to see where they were originating, where they were coming from, where they were going. And ultimately, in part of Project Sign, which was the first, foremost, and probably the best UFO investigation of all time, they saw, the astronomers reported that they saw these UFO fleets coming and going from Saturn's moon, Titan. And when we got to Titan with the Huygens spacecraft, we found basically a planet that looks more like Earth than any other planet that we've yet seen, except possibly for Mars. The difference is that Titan has oceans of methane and has an atmosphere primarily of methane rain, and has a temperature of 165 degrees below zero. So it's a very cold place, and this is where the Project Sign astronomers determined as the base of the UFO fleets that were coming to Earth in 1947, 48.
Hmm.
Hmm.
I,
And I believe, well, you
that,
know, and we also know about Europa, right? That's the big question mark. You know, the frozen ice ball that has a 60-mile ocean under it, one of the moons of Jupiter. So Europa is a likely candidate. Titan. Titan possibly may have a non-carbon-based life form uh, inhabiting it. And I do believe that the moon has occupants and that there's a lot of activity on the far side of the moon.
I
well, I
wanted to
know.
get into that, but we don't have a whole lot of time. But yes, I'm sorry I overstepped, Brian. Go
Oh no,
ahead.
no, no, that's fine. Um, One of the gentlemen I used to work for, I was an operations manager for a place in Texas, and the gentleman that owned the company, he was in the army back in the 40s and 50s, and he was part of the radar. The gentleman who manned the radar that were pinging radar off the moon back in the 40s and the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
And when they were pinging the radar off the moon, he was like, you could hear it. It sounded hollow.
Mm-hmm. Oh, here's something else. There's something called the long delayed echo that was picked up when we started beaming radio at first toward the moon. In the 1920s, they discovered that there was this echo coming back of the radio waves. And this phenomenon has persisted. And it turned out that when they estimated the distance, it seemed to be something, it was hitting something on the farther side, beyond the moon, about 1/3 of the distance that we have from the moon.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're 220, 225,000 miles from the moon, because it varies, right? It was 1/3 farther beyond the moon than that. So maybe 75,000 miles on the other side of the moon, shielded by the moon, except that the signal was wrapping around or going through and bouncing off, and then it was moving. The echo was perceived coming sometimes from behind the moon or off to the side of the moon from an object that we couldn't see. So that's called the long delayed echo, and that's a very interesting story to read about. If you LDE, the long delayed echo, Google that, and you'll find some very interesting things. Well, Tesla said that he had communicated with Mars, if you recall.
Yes, I
That he
do
had
recall that.
received a signal from Mars. And many people believe that Tesla himself was in contact with extraterrestrials or had the psychic gift to be able to communicate or receive messages. It's a really common knowledge now that the Germans had two occult societies, the Thule Gesellschaft, the Thule Society, and the Vril Society, and that they used mediums, actually media, two women, they were mediums, to communicate with an extraterrestrial race that came from Aldebaran in the constellation of Taurus, and that they downloaded a lot of this information on how to build a flying saucer, basically, through Maria Orsic, one of the most sensitive medium that the Vril and Thule Gesellschaft had. And she wrote down the plans and drew the blueprints, and the Germans started to build anti-gravity devices and succeeded quite well, as a matter of fact.
Wow. I see. I've never heard that before.
About the mediums?
About the mediums and and them developing the actual anti-gravity devices.
Oh yeah, well they got everything they could. They also had a vast spy network, and they actually stole a lot of Nikola Tesla's technology. You know, what we call it industrial espionage.
It's,
That was going on all the time from the 20s and 30s, And there are stories of the Germans sending spies to steal Tesla's ideas. But Tesla was patenting all of his ideas. I have seen an 1892 patent for basically a flying saucer that he designed around wedges, triangular wedges of copper plates ringed around like a pie plate. And he believed that by inducing an alternating current, with one plate positive while the other plate was negative, and then quickly oscillating them, that he would disrupt the force of gravity and the craft would levitate and fly. He actually patented it. I saw it. And then I found a photograph of one of the early German UFOs, German flying saucer projects. It really looks like a clunky one. It's got a very sharp, razor-sharp edge to the circular wing, and it has a turret that's really round, kind of like the Monitor, the Merrimack and the Monitor.
Yes.
And the cheese box type of top. But when I looked closely at the wing structure, it was composed of triangular plates like the Tesla patent that I had seen dating back to 1892. So this would be during the Third Reich around 1936, 34, 35, 36, and when they were getting going. They had their own UFO crash retrievals as well. The Germans recovered a craft that crashed into the Black Forest near Freiburg, Germany. They also recovered a craft that crashed in Turkey. And that's a very interesting story because, as you know, the Germans were sending scientists and archaeologists all over the world on expeditions everywhere. Classical Hellenistic mythology was being studied, the Greek gods. They thought the Greek gods looked like Germans, when they looked at the statues. They didn't look like modern Greeks. They studied Tibet. They thought Tibet was the last remnant of the Atlantean root race. They studied Vimanas. They studied the Hindu scriptures and deduced that Vimanas were flying saucers that were propelled by mercury plasma engines. So the Germans were way, way ahead on the cutting edge of technology, and they took everything they could get and pulled it together, and they joined two resources. They joined rocketry and intelligence together in 1943, and they called this rocketry and intelligence operation union the Middle Works. You know what Middle Works means? Central Works. Now you know where the Central Intelligence Agency gets its name.
Oh, great.
Central Works, Middle Works. Now the other reason the Central Intelligence Agency is called Central and not United States Intelligence Agency is that the German spies who surrendered to us after World War II, fearing capture by the Russians, because the Russians did not negotiate with Nazis. The Nazis had just so brutalized the Soviets that there was no, negotiation, especially with the spies. Do you know that James Bond villainy of Spectre and Smersh? Spectre is made up. It's like the mafia, special executive for counterterrorism, revenge, and extortion. That's what Spectre stands for. But Smersh is actually the real name of the Russian anti-spy bureau in the Soviet Union. It was Smersh Spionin. So these guys were out to kill spies. So when they would knock on the door, and they say, "Who's there?" Smersh. You know what Smersh means? Death. Who's at the door? Death is at the door because you're a spy.
Right.
So this secret intelligence of marriage of intelligence and technology occurred through the surrender of Reinhard Gehlen, who was Hitler's top spy. So he surrendered himself, his organization, and his network to the U.S. Army while he was a prisoner of war during World War II. He was captured and he got permission from his commanding officer to offer his services in return for their safe passage to the United States, which became Operation Paperclip. So the top Nazi organized our CIA because he brought the middle work with him. So it's not surprising that the mentality that it exhibited for the first 40 years of its existence was so much like what we saw in the Third Reich. So now you know where Central Intelligence comes from. And here's the point. It's not called United States Intelligence Agency because according to the contract that was negotiated by Reinhard Gehlen and the U.S. Army, they would not work for a United States Intelligence Agency because they would consider themselves traitors to Germany. So they negotiated a treaty where they were working with and not for the United States. But interestingly enough, in one of the clauses in this contract said that if ever the interests of Germany and the interests of the United States should diverge, their loyalty was to Germany first and not to the United States.
Wow.
So all of these are parts of the contract. Oh, the other part of the contract that Gehlen wrote up or arrived at agreement with the United States Army and the Central Intelligence Agency was that none of the funding for his organization would appear in the congressional record. Now, where does that put it?
Mm-hmm.
Black budget from the very beginning. So if you are not being funded according to the funding in the congressional record, where are you going to get your money? You have to get it from black sources, you know? And that's where we get into the drug dealing in order to finance intelligence operations that characterized the CIA in the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s and so on.
Yeah, it's very mysterious, very espionage and that sort of thing.
Yep.
Wow, Robert. Oh man, I wanted to get into JFK and some other things, and we just.
Oh, we've got time. The anniversary's coming. We can do it later.
Great. Yeah. I would love to have you come back and talk about that. Is there anything that's coming up that you'd like to put out there for you?
Well, yes. Keep an eye on UFO Digest because we are from September through November every year. I run a program called the JFK Torrent of Truth, and this is a series of articles that we publish from top-notch JFK investigators and researchers. I'd like to point people to the work of Dr. David Mantik, who has proven scientifically, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that the JFK skull X-rays are hoaxes. They've been artificially created and photographically manipulated, and that's a big thing for my work, because my work involves exposing the doctoring of the Zapruder film, which is an optical illusion, and the altering of the medical evidence in the JFK assassination autopsy by substituting the brain and the body and the photographs and x-rays of a police officer named J.D. Tippit, who bore such a close resemblance to President Kennedy that his friends on the Dallas Police Department used to call him Jack and JFK.
Oh, wow.
That was the reason he was killed. He was the getaway vehicle. And come November, we can have a long discussion on how I discovered the substitution of the body of Officer J.D. Tippit for that of President Kennedy. None of the photographs that you've seen purported to be President Kennedy in the morgue in Bethesda are President Kennedy. They are Officer J.D. Tippit dressed up, cosmetized, to make him look as much as possible like President Kennedy. But I saw the real President Kennedy, and I was able to tell the difference and prove the difference. And now this Dr. Mantik, my colleague Dr. Mantik, has proven that the X-rays are hoaxed. So little by little, pieces of evidence keep coming up, and we're ready to expose the whole plot.
And the rabbit hole just gets deeper and deeper.
Yep, and the light gets brighter and brighter down the hole.
That is amazing. Well,
Yes.
thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
Yes, please come
My pleasure.
back, and we'd love to have you back in November if that's possible, and
Okay.
definitely talk about that more. And
Sure.
again, I just want to thank you for coming on, and man, right on. That's all I can say. It's
I appreciate it very much. Thank you
an
very much. I
amazing
was very happy
experience
to meet
on
you.
my part. Thank you very much.
Thank you, audience. Have a good night.
You too. Thank you. Wow, guys, that was Robert Morningstar. Oh man, I am blown away. That was just so awesome.
That is definitely one gentleman that has a lot of information. I mean, he
Oh
was
my
an excellent
God.
guest.
Oh my God. I mean, just great. And you know, to come, to offer to come back in November and to talk about that is just it's just amazing. So yeah, please everybody, thanks for hanging in there with our audio problems, and that was definitely a treat for me. I'm just like blown away. Um, we're gonna have him back in November, and
Excellent.
we're gonna talk to him more about the JFK assassination. And that's funny, Brian. That was something I wanted to get into too. Was about the angles and that sort of thing. Um, about the assassination, and believe me, I'm gonna have questions lined up, big time.
Well, it's, I mean, yeah, we're independent. We went a little over, but it's just, it's a shame that we don't have more time on nights like this,
Oh,
and
I know.
and with guests like Robert.
Right. Well, we can always fix that. But yeah, that was just amazing, and I'm really happy about that. So again, guys, I'm sorry about the audio. I don't know what happened to the bumper and intro and outro music, but thanks again for hanging in there, and I hope you guys had a wonderful evening enjoying the show. That was Mr. Robert D. Morningstar. Man, again, that was just great. Brian, do you have anything to say before we go?
Oh, I just want everybody to try and have a safe week, and hopefully it's a good one.
And as me as well, please, everyone, have a safe week. And again, thanks again for everyone hanging in there. This is Beyond the Strange. I am Dave C., and this is Brian Anderson. And everyone have a good night. And remember, Beyonders believe. Have a good one.